Hi, guys, and welcome back to Hot History, the podcast covering all the things in history that you probably should know, but don't. I am so excited, as always, to have you guys listening along on this glorious Friday. I hope you are all feeling good. It's the end of the week. You got some history to kickstart the day. The weekend's coming in hot, and so am I, with a recommendation. Now, I do want to preface, I haven't finished it yet because it's coming out weekly. But I would love it for you guys to go on this journey with me if you're not already watching Love Story by Ryan Murphy. It is his new series about Carolyn Bessette Kennedy and JFK Jr. It is set in 90s New York, follows the two on their whirlwind, toxic, crazy, tabloid, featured romance. And the reason I want you guys to listen along is because in a few weeks, as we approach the season finale, I am going to do a full 90-minute deep dive into these two, their relationships, the Kennedys at large, and of course their tragic deaths. And as part of that, I'm also going to drop my review of the show. So if you guys want to watch along, share your thoughts to me, what you guys think of the show, then I would love to hear. It's streaming now week by week on Disney Plus on Fridays in Australia, and I think it's comes out on Thursdays in the US and UK. I don't know if Disney Plus is on Hulu for you guys, but anyway, I'm watching it on Disney, and I'd love for you guys to watch along so we can do that review episode together. But we are not there yet, and we are not in 90s New York today. We are instead heading back to 18th century France, specifically the years 1784 and 1785. Because our subject for this episode is none other than French Queen Marie Antoinette. Now, I have done a really, really short 30-minute episode on Marie on this pod before. Let me know if you guys do want a deeper dive on her specifically, but today, the 1784 to 1785 thing that we are talking about is the scandal which really tipped the boat of the revolution. It was an event that solidified the hatred of the people of France for their queen by essentially verifying that she was everything the tabloids said. It was kind of like 18th century France's answer to the Watergate tapes, except this is a scandal that Marie Antoinette had no part in, but was given the full blame for, which, if we're being honest, wasn't really that hard because at this point in her reign, she was known as an obscene spender of coin, earning her the nickname Madame Deficit. So where does this scandal begin? Well, it doesn't start at Versailles, or France for that matter. This story actually begins in the magical land of Wiener Schnitzels, Austria, in 1755, where a bouncing blonde baby by the name of Maria Antonia came screaming into the world. Her mother, Maria Theresa, ruled the Habsburg Empire with an iron fist, which included solidifying an alliance between long-term enemies, Austria and France. So how did she do this, guys? The peace call? Did she establish some new trade routes? Did she express ship schnitzel to the king? No. She pawned off 12-year-old Maria Antonia to the French king's grandson in marriage. This was the match of the century. Guys, after all, who doesn't want their daughter living in Versailles as Queen of France? But the reality was that Maria Antonia was the worst possible choice for this role. I am so serious. She was so poorly educated and disinterested that by age 12, she could barely speak German, let alone French. Kind of a big deal for someone who's going to become Queen of France. But what she lacked in academic potential, she had in spades when it came to her charm. And she began her life as the Dauphine, or Princess, of France in April 1770, where she enters this tent on Austrian soil, crosses the border into France, and becomes Marie Antoinette. Sounds like a fun, welcome ceremony, but it was fucked, guys. She was stripped down to her underwear, anything Austrian taken from her, including her dog Mops, and then introduced to the wettest of wet blankets perhaps in all of French history, her betrothed Louis, the 15-year-old Dauphin. No, wait. Dauphin. Dauphin is the prince. Dauphine is Marie. Yeah. Anyway, he was rigid, he was formal, and he refused to fuck his wife for 7 years. And while we go, like, that's literally because they're children, right? Back then, if you were over 12, you were marriage ready. And an unconsummated royal marriage was a very, very dangerous affair. Not only was Marie incapable of fulfilling her role of providing an heir, but without consummation, the marriage could be annulled and Marie shipped back to Austria and humiliated. This left 14-year-old Marie, I'm going to say it again, 14-year-old Marie as a failure, which really is the most dangerous thing any woman could be just in all of human history, because women actually aren't people. We're just, worms. And Marie is no exception to this. In fact, she is the most extreme example of it. You see, when she actually first arrived to Versailles, the court were pretty excited. Despite the fact she was Austrian, they were pretty thrilled that there was no more war, that there was no more animosity. This was going to be a prosperous reign. And she's this new, young, bouncy blonde girl. But that soon turned to disdain with each sexless night that passed between the new couple, because all of this just exacerbated the plain old racism the French court had for the Austrians. They'd grown up with them as their enemy, right? And they began calling her the Austrian, or that Austrian bitch, with the idea of her as a foreign, unwanted failure spreading through court like wildfire. This is paired with the fact that she publicly snubbed King Louis XV's mistress, Madame du Barry, which royally pissed him off. So all in all, Marie, a child, again, merely 14 years old, is pretty strongly disliked and even more miserable. The kind of misery and humiliation which would send all of us packing, right? We just lock ourselves in a small cupboard and not ever want to see the world again. But not Marie. She never hid away. She never let it slip. She never gave anyone the satisfaction of her defeat. Instead, she sought out the only kind of therapy a miserable girl in Paris could: retail. Which is where Madame Deficit comes into the picture. Now, it is no secret, dramatization, propaganda, nor prejudice, that Marie Antoinette loved stuff. If money could buy it, she would have it. And she spent on nearly everything imaginable. She redecorated Versailles. She had lavish jewels and gowns. She had her own theatre. She gambled excessively. And she even had a purpose-built rural village so she could effectively play poor person. In fact, in 1776, Marie Antoinette spent the equivalent of $3 million today on over 300 gowns, which she never wore twice. And this was not in the midst of a prosperous France, guys. After multiple failed harvests, several wars, and the nobility's gargantuan spending, France was in masses of debt. And the group continuously topping up the coffers was, you guessed it, the peasants. Of their wages, which were already pitiful, they paid 10% in tithe to the church, 25% in tax to the state, plus additional made-up fundraising opportunities including the salt tax, land tax, and a tax for each family member per household. So it's no wonder Marie earned the nickname Madame Deficit for her excesses while her people starved. And it is not an exaggeration, guys. Her spending habits were downright dumb, ludicrous, and selfish. But we do have to remember the context here. Marie spent lavishly, both out of genuine pleasure and as a means of overcompensating for her lack of satisfaction in her life. Which, to be honest, I do get. After all, her position at court was essentially dependent upon her 15-year-old socially awkward husband getting it up, with the peak of her spending occurring when she was a very young woman, with historian G. Fremont Barnes saying, once Marie Antoinette became a mother, she focused more of her energy on her children. This resulted in a very noticeable decline in the lavishness that had characterized her youth and early reign. She no longer bought jewelry or wore elaborate wigs. And while we can't simply chalk up being sad as an excuse for spending millions while your people suffer, I think we can all feel a little sympathy for a young woman who was completely out of her depth. Again, she's 14 years old. What were you doing when you were 14? Still in school. So imagine you're thrown into this court that is already prejudiced really against you by your politically ruthless mother. Plus, most importantly, and perhaps most annoyingly, at least for me anyway, Sis was not the only one dropping coin left, right, and center here. Her husband spent approximately $6 million today on one crown for his coronation and gave nearly 30 million livres at the time to his brothers every single year. There's also the estimated 1.3 billion livres he gave the Americans for the war against the English because, he hated the English. Plus, if we step back 150 years before Marie Antoinette, we have King Louis XIV, who dropped around $2 billion in today's estimates on the construction of Versailles because the Louvre wasn't grand enough for him. So do you think that may have something to do with France's worsening financial situation? But no, it's Marie Antoinette's dresses, which, sent France's bank accounts below zero. Good to know. Yeah, thank you. It's stupid, right? It is misogyny plain as day. And if we want to tease it out even more, guys, Marie wouldn't have had a fucking clue about the financial situation of France during these early years of her life in Versailles, even really in her early reign, because there's no way her husband, or any man for that matter, would have shared it with her. She is, after all, a woman. And more than that, she was the Austrian, who no one trusted. So the idea that Marie Antoinette was some financial analyst, poring over the state's accounts and studying the P&L, and then just in spite of all of that, because she's a monster, she goes and orders $3 million worth of dresses, is a fucking fantasy. Plus, yet again, no offense to her, but she can't fucking read and speak, let alone be the mastermind behind France's national debt crisis. And that's not a shot at Marie. I really do doubt any queen, princess, duchess, countess, or man of nobility, for that matter, especially the fucking king, could have told anyone the price of milk, salt, bread, or a simple petticoat. Because, unfortunately, much to the detriment of society, money, like most things, was not considered their business. In fact, there are actually many cases where Marie did spend her money on the poor. If we look at the Spring Festival in 1770, where countless people died due to improperly covered trenches, the Duchess de Polignac tells us that the grief Marie Antoinette felt was real. She says, "It was genuine and lasted for several days. Nothing could console her for the loss of so many innocent victims. And she didn't just feel poorly. Upon hearing of the disaster, both the Dauphin and Dauphine sent their yearly income to those families who had lost someone." But of course, this wasn't published at the time, and almost all of this is now skimmed over or used by historians to show how far she fell from the kind young Dauphine to the cold and selfish queen. And that's the thing about Marie Antoinette. She is a mutt of historical creation. 30% of what is written about her is fact. The rest is inflammatory, biased, misogynistic garbage, which turned Marie into the ultimate feminine villain. And the perfect example of this is the diamond necklace affair. So what the hell is this grand affair that we keep talking about? Well, in 1772, King Louis XV, so the king before Marie's husband, who also called Louis, he was the 16th, it's highly confusing, it's all unoriginal, but Louis XV, the king before, had a wildly scandalous mistress. Her name was Madame de Barry, and my word, guys, her life was wild. So unlike the women from court, and Louis himself, Madame du Barry came from humble beginnings, rising through Parisian high society thanks to her beauty, charm, and social intelligence, making her the companion, and likely mistress, of several influential figures, including Jean-Baptiste du Barry, who helped introduce her to several men of the court, including the king, in 1768. Now, he quickly became devoted to her and could not have her as an official mistress because she was not noble by birth, which was like one of the rules for the royal mistresses at Versailles. It was actually an official title and they were generally treated with respect. So, she was hastily married to a minor aristocrat arranged by the king. His name was Comte Guillaume du Barry, basically just to make her suitable for presentation at court. But when she was there, she was really widely disliked by many of the ladies of the court, especially by Marie Antoinette, who scorned the king's philandering behaviour. But he loved du Barry, so much so that he wanted to give her the gift to end all gifts. Now, ladies, if you're listening along and thinking, my God, my partner can be doing more for me, then perhaps best to close your ears right now, because King Louis XV decided to show his love for his official mistress by commissioning a 2,800-carat diamond necklace for her. The monstrosity of the thing was worth over 16 million US dollars today, and really looked more like a corset bra kind of thing. I will put some photos up on socials for you, but trying to describe it now for you, imagine like a normal choker necklace, right, over the neck. It then has 3 U-shaped drops, and then at either end of the necklace, there are these 2 giant like chains of diamonds, which form this big V down to the belly button. So you have the necklace, these 3 U's, then this giant V, which goes like over pretty much majority of the front of you, over the tits, over the stomach, to the belly button. It is the most gargantuan, gaudy, like Versailles thing you can imagine. And it was to be made by the French crown jewelers Charles-Auguste Baumer and Paul Bessenge. So at this point, pretty straightforward, guys. There is no affair, there's no scandal, aside from the fact that, Madame du Barry, the mistress, gets this giant necklace. But King Louis XV goes to them, he says, make this thing for me, invoice me when it's done, love you, bye. They start work straight away. They buy up over 630 diamonds from all over India, primarily from the Golconda region, which produced some of the finest diamonds on earth. I want to be clear here, guys, there was no lab-grown, 4 C's, make some compromises based on budget. These were all flawless, natural diamonds, because the king told the jewelers to spare no expense. Now, the process of making this massive necklace took over 6 years. Again, these diamonds have to be shipped from rural India, which back in 1772 would have taken around 6 months, and there would have been several trips in there. And with Baumer and Bessenge fronting the astronomical cost to make this thing, yeah, that's right, there was no deposits or anything from the king. These guys had to pay for all of this up front. They're really starting to feel the pinch. And it starts to bite on May 10th, 1774, because King Louis XV dies of smallpox before he can, 1, settle the account, and 2, give it to Madame du Barry. Now, this changes things for a couple of reasons. First, it means Marie Antoinette and her husband, Louis XVI, become the new king and queen. And second, it leaves the jewelers with a 16 million US dollar necklace unpaid for on their books. Now, lucky for the jewelers, their new queen had a prolific reputation for loving shiny things, and as such, they approached her husband, King Louis XVI, to purchase it for her. He agreed to their request. He knows his wife loves jewels, he's excited to give her a present, and he delivers the exciting news to Marie of this amazing gift that he's going to buy her. But contrary to Marilyn Monroe's Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, Marie's version was diamonds meant for a former mistress that you fucking hated are not a girl's best friend. She couldn't stand Du Barry. And the necklace, like I said, it was this like big, gaudy, fucking Trump Tower-esque monstrosity, which was the exact opposite of Marie's style. She, of course, had the big hair and the big dresses, but she found big, obscene designs in jewels just like tacky, and she really wouldn't be caught dead wearing anything designed for the likes of Du Barry. Plus, and this may surprise you given her historical persona as an out-of-touch spendomaniac, but Marie became incredibly conservative with her spending when she became queen and later a mother, becoming more aware of the state's finances and the expanding role of France in the American Revolution, reportedly saying to Louis when he told her of his intended gifts, "We have more need of 74 ships than of necklaces." So all in all, guys, Marie doesn't like the necklace, she doesn't want the necklace, and she sees no value in dishing out so much cash for the necklace. This puts Beaumaire and Bassenge in an impossible situation. And they try several more times, actually, to get the Queen to purchase it in the next 10 years, during which time they are almost entirely bankrupted by this thing. Which is when reason goes out the door and desperation walks in the form of one Cardinal Rohan. So who's this guy? Another new character, another new bombshell enters the villa. Well, Louis de Rohan was born in 1734 into the House of Rohan, one of the most powerful aristocratic families in France. So much so, they boasted about their personal motto of "King I cannot be, Prince I do not deign to be, Rohan I am." So really a guy like conditioned to power, prestige, and proximity to the throne, who decided one of the best ways for him to have influence with that proximity is a career in the church. So he goes ahead and enrolls, into ecclesiastical school. He rises through the ranks there, thanks in large part to his aristocratic influence, and he soon becomes the Grand Almoner of France. This is one of the highest religious offices in the kingdom, and it puts him in direct contact with the monarchy. In this, he's pretty skilled. Like he's really well suited to this job because he knows the ways of the aristocracy and the monarchy. But what he doesn't know is the ways of the Austrians, something which becomes increasingly evident when he is sent as French ambassador to Vienna in the early 1770s. Now remember, King Louis XV is the king at this time. So Rohan, he feels super secured. He's got a good relationship with, the king. He goes off to Vienna and he basically just has a big old piss up. And when he is there, he gets this reputation for mass frivolity and begins writing to the French court. This guy's so dumb. But anyway, he begins writing to the French court about how Empress Maria Theresa and her court are far less sophisticated than the French. He describes the Empress in a really unflattering light. And he even suggests treason and skepticism about the Austrians' intentions for war. Eventually, as I'm sure you can guess, these reports made their way back to Empress Maria Theresa, who is less than impressed, but more importantly, they make their way to her daughter, Marie Antoinette, who becomes Queen of France 4 years later. And she's fucking pissed off at this guy. Rightfully so, right? He's like talking shit about her mum. He's stocking superstition of her intentions at court here in Versailles. So she, from the get-go, flat out refuses to receive Rohan. It is a big old, 5 to the face, doesn't want anything to do with him, including his family members. She's super cold towards them. And you have to understand the context here again. He's really proud. He comes from a deeply aristocratic family, so this exclusion, humiliating, mortifying. But more than that, it's also really dangerous. You see, the French court, really any of the royal courts at this time, operated on a system of proximity to the sovereign. If you were close, you were in. If you weren't, you were out. And the result could be anything from the stripping of one's lands and titles or just general gossip and othering. So this network of intimacy and favor became really the lifeblood of Versailles, making it super ruthless. And if you're Rohan, who's pissed the queen off, and while sure, like he was still powerful within ecclesiastical circles thanks to his role in the church, he lacked anything close to the queen's favor. And it only got worse the more that time went on. He was just excluded further. Which is when the Comtesse Jeanne de la Motte enters the picture. Now, she is the opposite of Cardinal Rohan. She is born as the daughter of a failed minor nobleman, and her childhood was prone to instability and financial collapse, often living in poverty, which is pretty ironic because technically she had royal blood. You see, the current French kings are from the Bourbon dynasty, but the rulers before them were called the Valois dynasty, and it was this line that Jeanne descended from. And while her branch of the family, sure, they'd fallen into obscurity, the name remained, allowing her to marry and perform nobility pretty convincingly enough to gain access to certain social circles within Versailles, none of which were significant enough to ever be truly close to the queen. But she understood that if she could position herself just close enough, just on the edge, she could use this perception to her advantage. And this is where Rohan and Jeanne come together. Literally. After years on the fringe, Jeanne recognized vulnerability when she saw it, and a rejected Cardinal Rohan was about as on the fringe as it gets. So she began befriending him, at first with gentle conversation and then between her legs, and day by day, she began positioning herself to him as one of the Queen's favourites. She claimed to Rohan that her and Marie Antoinette actually enjoyed a secret close friendship, deliberately concealed because of Jeanne's Valois blood and her humble upbringings, basically. After all, right, Marie Antoinette is a Bourbon queen. She can hardly be openly friendly with this Valois gal. So Rohan, loving this, right? He's thinking maybe Jeanne can whisper some nice things back to the queen about me, which is when Jeanne comes up with her master plan. It was no secret that Bourbon and Bacenge had the necklace, and that Marie Antoinette had rejected it on the premise of, like I said, the 74 ships. So Jeanne suggests to Rohan, Marie's actually lying. She really wants the necklace, but she couldn't be seen buying something so expensive and obscene in the middle of France's, economic woes. So she tells Rohan this is his chance to win back the Queen's favor by secretly going to get this necklace for her. Now Rohan, to his credit, he is initially a little skeptical of this coming. He does, it's not from the Queen directly. But he comes around and he agrees to help by going to at least just inspect the necklace and find out about the price. Now, we are very lucky in this because we actually have a first-hand account of this whole interaction from Bourbon and Bacenge themselves, who wrote, saying, on January 24th, 1785, the Cardinal of Rohan came to our store, Bourbon and Bacenge's, and asked us to show him various jewels. We took advantage of this opportunity to show him a big diamond necklace, a unique and rare piece of its kind. After having examined it, this prince, it's still Cardinal Rohan that we're talking about, but they often refer to him as this prince told us he had heard about this jewel and that he had come because he was given the responsibility of checking the price. We told him that we wanted to sell the necklace because it had become a heavy burden on us. It cost 1.6 million livres, even though it cost us more to make it. Nevertheless, we were determined to sell the necklace and told him that we would be very happy that Her Majesty the Queen wear the jewel. The prince told us that he would mention to the Queen the meeting he had had with us, and also that he would be responsible for buying the necklace. After seeing the necklace and getting this final price from the jewelers, Rohan then went to visit Jeanne and pass on the findings. The necklace was real, it was huge, and most importantly, the price tag, 1.6 million livres. So he asked Jean to take this information back to the Queen, mentioned that it was he who acquired it, and that should she choose to purchase the necklace, he would happily manage this transaction for her. Now at this point, right, it's all like seeming to be pretty logical, legit. And a few days later, Jean comes back saying the Queen would like terms negotiated for the purchase and the payment schedule of that before she moves ahead. So Rohan requests a meeting with Bourbon and Basenj, who again record this whole thing from us so we can hear it directly from their lips. They say, 2 days later, the prince asked us to come to his house and he told us that he could negotiate with us if we would promise to keep everything secret. We promised we would, and he informed us of a proposal to acquire the necklace. After having read these proposals, he asked us if they would be suitable for us, and we answered yes. Again, it was super important this all remained secret, and the terms agreed to was a payment plan to the jewelers with interest, which would be paid upfront with the first scheduled payment, and a meeting with the Queen where they could admire her wearing the piece. So Rohan, he gets this all in writing. Bourbon and Basenj will agree to it all if the Queen signs it off, and Jean is given the papers for the Queen to review. Again, all legit at this point. Super logical, all making sense. But at this point, it is January 28th. And like I said, everyone's feeling pretty good. The jewelers are finally, going to get out of financial trouble. Rohan may get back in with the Queen. But what about Jean? In case you haven't guessed, she was no simpering countess, nor was she the secret bestie of Marie Antoinette. She was an opportunist who saw a way out of her life of mediocrity through the desperation of the rejected Rohan. You see, the Queen never mentioned to Jean she wanted the necklace. She never came anywhere near her. Instead, Jean planned to steal it, break it up, and sell the diamonds in London for a pretty penny. And while Rohan had, gone along with her deception so far, she could see he was getting a little antsy as the deal came to a close. So she orchestrated her final grand act of persuasion with theatrical precision designated for Shakespeare and Meryl Streep. That evening, Rohan was strolling through the gardens of Versailles in dim light and shadow, contemplating this act for his queen, when suddenly a woman dressed in white approached him. She handed him a rose in the mist and shadow of moonlight and murmured a few words of thanks for his service to his queen. The woman, however, was not the queen, but a prostitute chosen for her resemblance, but it didn't matter. In darkness and deception, Rohan accepted the illusion that he had been forgiven and was close to coming back into the fold directly by his queen, right? And it spurred him on, it gave him the courage to get out there so that when Jean returned the next day with the payment terms signed on the dotted line by Marie Antoinette de France, Rohan is certain of what he has to do. So a few days later, by this point it's Feb 1st, 1785, Rohan in his victory sends an unsigned note to Bourbon and Basenj saying, "I would like Monsieur Bourbon and his partner to come to my house as soon as possible with the object in question." Now these guys, absolutely buzzing. Because they said we will not sell without the signed payment terms, so this meeting must mean the sale is going ahead. In their recounting of this, they said, "We immediately went and brought him the famous necklace. During the meeting, he told us that Her Majesty the Queen was going to acquire the jewel, and he showed us that the proposals we had accepted were signed by Marie Antoinette of France. We showed our joy and satisfaction, and the prince assured us that he would deliver the necklace during the day. At the same time, he told us that Her Majesty could not meet with them as mentioned in the proposal, but he hoped that we would receive the interest we claimed, and he would represent them, in this endeavour, as he considered our request fair." This is how our third meeting ended. So this is the point the jewelers gave Rohan the necklace. They are a little crabby. They, couldn't give it to her themselves in this meeting, which was a part of the initial terms, but I guess she is the queen, she is busy. And this whole thing is meant to be in secret. Plus, they're just really glad to be rid of this thing. So they hand it over to the Queen's agent in all of this, Rohan. And this is where things go properly pear-shaped. So Rohan, With the necklace in his possession, he obviously wants to get it to the Queen as quickly as possible. As such, previously arranged with Jean for a royal courier to take the necklace from him directly to Versailles. Now, this private representative, uber reserved, right? Pre-arranged, prepaid, appeared to be totally legit. He's in the outfit, the uniform. And Rohan hands this necklace over, thinking, it's going to the Queen, like I'm getting back in. When in reality, this courier was a black market dealer who delivered the piece to Jean, who broke it down to its individual jewels, hands some to the courier, others to her husband, both of whom go, smuggle the jewel out of France, and then sell them all off individually or in small groups through various London jewelers and private buyers, which made them almost impossible to trace, with like thousands of loose diamonds entering the busy London market in the 1780s at this time. Now, at this point, everyone's still happy. Rohan thinks he's about to be back in the fold, like I said. Jean is on her way to being a millionaire. The jewelers are going to be paid. Marie Antoinette has a big old fat necklace. Except, of course, she doesn't. And when the first payment date comes around for the necklace, Bourbon and Versailles become very, very agitated. And they tell us of this, saying, Rohan told us that as soon as we had the opportunity to meet Her Majesty the Queen, we should thank her for buying the necklace. But we never had the opportunity to meet her. We waited until July when the prince asked us to come to this house. He told us that the necklace was too expensive for the Queen. Her Majesty had the intention to give it back to us unless we considered lowering its price to 200,000 livres. We were filled with sorrow after hearing this, and we told the prince of the misfortune these events were leading us into, since on one hand, we had refused to sell the jewel to the Spanish court where it had been asked for several times, and on the other hand, we had committed ourselves to several creditors after the prince had assured us that we would receive the first payment from Her Majesty. The prince promised us that he would mention these facts to the Queen. A few days later, he told us that Her Majesty had accepted our last settlements, and instead of receiving 400,000 livres, which was the newly negotiated rate, we would soon receive 700,000 livres, which would allow us to honour our commitments. At the same time, the prince told us to thank the Queen. For fear that we would not be able to tell her verbally, we wrote her a thank you note, which was delivered by Bourbon to Her Majesty. So, guys, there's no first payment. In fact, they're now hearing she can't make the payments at all because she can't actually afford the 1.6 million livre price tag. And they must drop it first, like I said, to 200,000. Then it's negotiated up to 400,000. And, in the end, it was the 700,000 that Rohan said the Queen would pay. But despite all of this negotiating, despite the necklace being handed over and gone, this is all just talk. There is not a single cent changed hand, which is why they decided to write to the Queen themselves. In all of this, Rohan is, again, getting this information from Jean, who, for God knows what reason, is still in fucking France. If you're going to steal a necklace, which you're almost, certainly going to be found out over, you'd think you'd flee the country. But, she didn't. If she had, I reckon she probably would have gotten away with it. But again, she doesn't. For when the Queen receives this note from the royal jewelers, the whole scheme comes undone. Now, to say that Marie Antoinette is furious about this is a complete understatement. She denied ever hearing of the necklace from Jean, let alone arranging for her to purchase it via Rohan, and her confusion turned to anger when she told her husband, who launched a swift and strenuous investigation calling Bourbon and Versailles before them. Now, they attend because they are equally keen to sort this matter out, because they've got no money and no necklace. And when they do, they present the signed payment terms with the signature Marie Antoinette de France. When the king sees this, he loses his fucking mind. For no member of the French monarchy, or any monarchy for that matter, would be caught dead signing their name de France. After all, one hardly needs to say, I'm Marie of France when you're the Queen of France and you're buying something in France. So from there, the truth becomes clear, and the scenes that unfolded make me wish that the 18th century had the internet, cameras, and Bravo, because it is pure fucking cinema, right? Imagine this in your brain right now. It's the 15th of August, 1785. The whole French court is awaiting the king and queen to go to the chapel to celebrate the feast of the Assumption of Mary. Super important day in the Catholic calendar. The church officiant presiding over this, Cardinal Rohan. But instead of conducting his role in church, he was dragged in front of the whole court before the king and queen and forced to explain himself. He's confused, of course, but he produces a letter, again signed Marie Antoinette de France, and the king flies off the fucking handle, stating Rohan had breathed royal etiquette since birth and could not understand how a courtier, above all a Rohan, so keen on the details of status and self-importance, could make such a mistake. And he is not wrong. Think about it, this guy is so self-important, he's a Rohan, they have their famous saying, and he's fooled by the Marie Antoinette de France. So he is arrested. He's taken to the Bastille, but not before sending a note ordering the destruction of all of his correspondence. Jean does the same at this point, but eventually she too is arrested 3 days later. Also arrested at this point was the prostitute pretending to be Marie and the man who confessed to forging the Queen's signature in this, so one of Jean's criminal partners. What followed was a sensational trial the year later, which resulted, shock, in the acquittal of Rohan and both the aforementioned co-conspirators. Jean, however, was condemned to whipping, branded with a V for velours, aka thief, on each of her shoulders, and sent off to life imprisonment. But guess what? She dresses up as a boy, she escapes, she goes to England, and she writes all sorts of fucking nonsense about her and Marie being lesbians, and Marie corrupted her because she's Austrian and evil and sinful, and that's why Jean became a criminal mastermind. Now, while I do love a woman in business, and I appreciate the lengths that Jean went to get her bag, the real punishment was not for her, or Rohan, or anyone else, but for Marie. When I say the repercussions of the diamond necklace affair for Marie Antoinette were lethal, I do not exaggerate. Napoleon Bonaparte later said the Queen's death must be dated from the diamond necklace trial. And he's bang on. Public opinion was much excited by the trial, which became known as the Diamond Necklace Affair. And while the trial found Marie Antoinette blameless in this matter, she'd been taken advantage of, right? It's practically identity theft. And the evidence conclusively proved she was not involved in any way, shape, or form. Many people in France persisted that the Queen was the mastermind behind it all. When Rohan was acquitted, Marie was noticeably disappointed, which many chalked up to her prejudice against him and therefore motive to involve him as the foreman. While others, on the flip side, saw that his acquittal implied that Marie Antoinette had somehow been in the wrong and, needed him to be found not guilty to expunge her own guilt and involvement. All in all, though, it just came down to the fact the Queen's prior frivolous spending was all the proof the French people needed for her guilt to be confirmed. And as historian G. Fremont Barnes says, her reputation was already at a low ebb when she was unjustly implicated in the diamond necklace affair. And again, I think you can see the French people's point here, right? It's easy to believe that the Queen, who spent $3 million today on her wardrobe despite her people starving, would do the same again with diamonds. So much so that when the gates of Versailles were thrown open and the palace stormed, revolutionaries reached Marie's bedroom and asked, "Where are the walls filled with diamonds?" This was just one of the stories that were thrown around in pamphlets and caricatures after the diamond necklace affair to portray the Queen as this evil spendthrift. And while the affair occurred 4 years before the revolution, it was the essential moment the Bourbon monarchy was discredited in the eyes of the French people. Again, as Napoleon said, the Queen's death must be dated from the diamond necklace trial. And this is how 30% fact, Marie Antoinette loved spending money on shiny things, has been exaggerated into 70% myth. She attempted to defraud the royal jewelers and make a profit on the black market. And this didn't just happen when Marie was alive. It continued well after her death with the thing we remember her for: cake. The story goes that when Marie Antoinette was told her people were starving from bread shortages, she replied, "Qu'ils mangent de la brioche," which translates to "let them eat brioche," a rich bread which was just as luxurious as cake at the time. Since then, "let them eat cake" has echoed through the centuries to confirm Marie Antoinette as history's biggest bitch. And it's no wonder. It is a pretty effective turn of phrase which seems to perfectly illustrate the way aristocrats are oblivious to their privilege in a way that seems almost too good to be true. And that's because it is. Not only is there absolutely no historical evidence to support Marie Antoinette ever saying "let them eat cake," but its actual origins predate her by nearly 200 years as part of German folklore, with the phrase "let them eat cake" first being published in 1767 when Marie Antoinette was 12 years old, during which time she's in Austria and she can barely speak German, let alone French, so I hardly think she has the time nor the aptitude to make insensitive comments about cake. In fact, it was not until at least 50 years after Marie Antoinette's death that "let them eat cake" was even attributed to her. So why would someone be dredged up from the depths of history to say something about eating cake? The reason's pretty simple, guys. France needed a villain. And what's better than a bitch? Which is how we wound up with the myth of Marie Antoinette we know today, and how impactful the diamond necklace affair was in setting Marie up for that historical legacy. The truth is, so much of Marie's life is tainted by bias and misrepresentation, and so many of her possessions destroyed in the revolution, that we don't really know the truth of the real Marie, especially because the majority of her history is recorded by men. But there are moments, I believe, we see the real Marie Antoinette: the good, the bad, the ugly, the human. One of these is her excessive dress bill. It is fucking abominable and idiotic and senseless, like I said, and she was that person at one point in her life. Another is the diamond necklace affair, right? She's matured, she's grown up, she is aware of the state of the world and rejecting this gift which her husband wanted to give her, him. Her judgment here was bang on in rejecting it. She learned from that girl that she once was, but, was taken advantage of because that reputation already existed. Again, she is human. She made mistakes, but she learned. It just so happened she, wound up in the middle of a con. Another of these moments, well, I think anyway, is when everything had been stripped from her. With her clothes torn, her body covered in food scraps, and her famous blonde hair now grey and shaven, she approached the guillotine after years of imprisonment and humiliation. Accidentally stepping on the executioner's foot, she says, "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Again, I want to be really clear. I think Marie Antoinette was a terrible ruler in a terrible time for the French people. But she was not the sole cause of, nor could she have been the sole solution to, France's economic woes. And to lay blame solely at her feet is not only factually incorrect, but a clear example of how prejudice and propaganda have passed through our history books, proven perfectly by the diamond necklace affair. In the end, the myth of Marie Antoinette is just that, a myth, fabricated by those who sought to use her as a scapegoat to further their own agendas, whether that agenda be anti-Austrian, anti-monarchy, anti-privilege, or anti-women. The scandalous French queen served them all. And if there is one thing I am certain of, It's that the majority of historians throughout time rarely let the truth get in the way of a good story. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Hot History. Thank you so much for following along with me on this episode, and make sure to tune in next week because we're going to be sticking around with Marie Antoinette for a bit of it, alongside the Romanovs, the city of Constantinople, the German Kaiser post-World War I, and even modern times to Jeffrey Epstein, in an episode which looks at exactly what happens to fortunes, jewels, possessions, houses, Swiss bank accounts, and all after it comes crashing down. As always, guys, if you're looking for some more hot history, then you can follow us on Instagram at Hot History Club and on TikTok at hot.history. It has been a pleasure getting down and dirty in time with you, and I will speak to you all next Friday. Thanks, guys. Love you.